A highly sophisticated manipulator does not try to look powerful, they try to look fragile, because your empathy is far easier to exploit than your fear. In the next 10 minutes, you will understand the mechanics of weaponized victimhood, the DARVO behavioral algorithm, and a concrete protocol to stop apologizing for the boundaries that protect your psychological sovereignty. The primary barrier to recognizing weaponized victimhood is the natural human instinct to protect those who are suffering. In healthy social structures, an expression of distress or vulnerability serves as a direct biological signal for assistance, de-escalation, and conflict resolution. However, within abusive or exploitative profiles, vulnerability is utilized as an asymmetrical defensive asset. This analysis draws strictly from empirical, peer-reviewed trauma literature and behavioral conditioning models to cut through the sensationalized pop psychology discourse surrounding relational manipulation. A sophisticated manipulator understands that open aggression invites resistance and exposes their malicious intent. By adopting the posture of the injured party, they neutralize your defensive perimeters. They turn your ethical framework against you. The conversation ceases to be about the objective harm they caused and is systematically redirected into an emergency intervention to soothe their emotional distress. You are pulled out of the role of an investigator and forced into the role of a savior, trapping you inside the rescue cycle, leaving the original transgression completely unexamined. If this framing is giving structure to something you have experienced, subscribe to the Shadow Protocol and hit like. New clinical analysis every week. Now, let us examine how the algorithm executes. To understand the operational execution of weaponized victimhood, we must dissect the primary linguistic and behavioral algorithm utilized by exploitative profiles during moments of confrontation. Foundational clinical research on interpersonal power violations has codified this systematic sequence under the acronym DARVO: Deny, Attack, and Reverse Victim and Offender. It spells 5 letters, but it runs as 3 distinct moves, executed the exact second accountability is requested. The manipulator initiates a total baseline denial of the objective data. They do not merely dispute your interpretation, they state flatly that the event did not occur, or that your recollection is a total fabrication. This anchors the interaction back into the gaslighting sandbox. The moment you present evidence that invalidates their denial, the manipulator pivots to an aggressive attack. However, this attack is rarely physical. It is an assault on your core character, your psychological stability, or your motives. They will state that you are malicious, vindictive, hypercritical, or that you are intentionally looking for reasons to destroy the relationship. This is the definitive structural inversion. The manipulator merges the denial and the attack to complete a total role reversal. They claim that your attempt to hold them accountable is the true act of abuse. They point to the emotional distress caused by your boundary and frame that distress as physical proof that you are the perpetrator. The interpersonal physics shift completely. You entered the conversation seeking an apology for a boundary violation, and you are systematically engineered into a corner where you must defend your character while the original violation remains entirely unaddressed. DARVO explains the mechanism. The second layer is why it works so reliably, and why empathetic people are its most vulnerable targets. Subscribe to the Shadow Protocol and hit like to help this analysis reach others. We deliver structured clinical deconstructions every week to help you decode manipulative behavior and protect your long-term autonomy. Let us return to the analysis. The efficacy of weaponized victimhood relies entirely on the internal architecture of the target's psychology. It requires an empathetic response to function as the engine of its own capture. When a highly empathetic individual witnesses another human being experiencing intense emotional distress, the manipulator exploits this instinctual desire to offer comfort. Simultaneously, they weaponize your innate drive to resolve severe cognitive dissonance. The manipulator forces a stark psychological contradiction. I see myself as a fair person, but this individual is telling me that my boundaries are destroying them. Empirical research investigating victim outcomes within DARVO frameworks has found that this tactical role reversal produces exceptionally high rates of sudden self-blame and unearned guilt within the target. To resolve this profound discomfort, your brain defaults to the path of least resistance, assuming you are the one who is being too harsh. Your logical, critical thinking is completely offline, bypassed by a manufactured crisis designed to force your capitulation. The manipulator intentionally triggers your internal desire to be a fair, compassionate person. It is psychologically easier for an empathetic person to accept the narrative that they are being too harsh than to accept the terrifying reality that the person in front of them is intentionally using their weeping as a weapon. Before we reveal the operational execution tools to break this cycle, you must prepare for the single most dangerous configuration of weaponized victimhood, the one strategy that routinely dismantles a target's social credibility and reputation. It is called the pity pivot, and it is exceptionally difficult to defend against because it moves completely outside the private space of your relationship. By weaponizing social and professional circles where you possess no direct control, the manipulator can systematically dismantle your reputation while remaining completely immune to exposure. Pay absolute attention to this structural threat. While not a formal diagnostic category in the DSM, this dynamic functions as a highly precise behavioral description of the pity pivot. When a manipulator senses that your boundary is unshakable and that you are refusing to buy into their private weeping, they will immediately export their victim persona to the surrounding collective structure. They will contact mutual friends, family members, or human resource representatives and execute a preemptive strike disguised as a cry for help. They will use phrases like, "I don't know what I'm doing wrong. No matter how hard I try to change, they just keep punishing me. I am terrified of their coldness lately. I feel like I am walking on eggshells just to survive their anger." Notice the deliberate strategic inversion. By presenting themselves as the fragile, long-suffering party to your social network, they achieve structural triangulation. This installs a protective armor around the manipulator. If you attempt to expose their original bad behavior to the group later, your disclosure lands on a preconditioned social network that already views you as the cold, punitive aggressor. They recruit your peers to act as third-party proxies, sometimes referred to behaviorally as flying monkeys, who will approach you to say, "Can't you just let it go? Look how broken they are over this." You are isolated by the weight of their public martyrdom. Now you understand the full structural threat. The final section is the operational protocol to stop the mechanism at every phase, private and public. Defeating weaponized victimhood requires you to decouple your empathetic response from the interaction entirely. You must treat their weeping as external atmospheric noise and anchor your strategy in a definitive standard of actions over apologies. Implement these 3 immutable rules of structural execution: the accountability stop. The moment you confront a manipulator and they begin to weep, claim they are a horrible person, or pivot to their own trauma, you must systematically disengage from the rescue cycle. Halt the conversation instantly. Do not offer comfort. Do not hand them a tissue. Maintain a completely flat emotional baseline and state the script neutrally. Your distress is noted. However, we are not discussing your emotional state right now. We are discussing your choice to violate our financial agreement. If they continue to escalate their collapse, stand up and exit the environment. Do not resume interaction until they can engage without using their emotional state as a shield. The narrative decoupling. Completely refuse to debate their assessment of your character. When they launch into the attack phase of DARVO and claim you are being vindictive or cruel, do not defend yourself. Defending yourself validates their redirection. Decouple your reality from their claims by stating cleanly, "You are allowed to perceive me that way. My focus remains on your behavior." By refusing to fight the mirror reflection they present, you force the focus of the interaction back onto the physical data of their original transgression. The performance audit. Manipulators who play the victim use words and weeping to bypass structural changes. They apologize with absolute theatrical performance, yet their baseline behavior remains completely unchanged. Stop indexing your safety to their emotional displays. Implement a cold evaluation rule. Measure them exclusively by their operational metrics over a 60-day window. If their weeping says, "I am broken and sorry," but the data shows they are continuing to cross your lines, ignore the theater entirely. Treat the performance as white noise and execute the predetermined consequence of your boundary instantly. True suffering seeks modification, resolution, and healing. Weaponized victimhood seeks compliance, evasion, and control. The moment you stop managing a manipulator's emotional state and focus exclusively on their behavioral data, you structurally remove most of the leverage a manipulator depends on. The use of quiet victimhood and chronic martyrdom to systematically drain a partner's autonomy is the definitive operational signature of the covert narcissist. Unlike their overt counterparts, these profiles operate entirely from the shadows of self-pity. To understand the hidden tactics of fragile grandiosity and passive-aggressive control, watch our comprehensive analysis of the covert narcissist right here on the left. Maintain your baseline, protect your reality. We will see you in the next analysis.